Welcome to Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling. I'm your host, Curtis Smith. Every week on this podcast, we talk about all things mental health, sometimes stress or anxiety. Perhaps you're burned out. Well, this is the podcast for you. We sit down with the wonderful counselors at Crosswinds Counseling and have a great conversation every week. Let's dive into this week's episode. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling. I'm your host, Curtis Smith. We are here with Molly Soberalski. Molly, thank you for joining us. Molly is one of the newest counselors here at Crosswinds Counseling. Molly, we're talking about a topic that you work with a lot and that we hear about a lot, and that's childhood grief. It's a big topic. When I just first say to you, tell me about childhood grief, what comes to mind? What kind of an overview can you give us on the topic?
Well, we certainly know that children are impacted by grief just the way adults are. And just as we know with adults, that grief can be a variety of different things. It doesn't have one special way that it looks, but it can certainly impact children. And I think we often think about grief from a loss of a significant loved one, and that is absolutely true. But grief in children can often look a little bit different. It can be the loss of a friend that's moving away. It can be the loss of a pet. It can be that transition with divorce or the adjustment of moving to a new school. So grief can impact children in sometimes ways that we don't think as adults.
Yeah. Part of it, I assume, is that for kids, it's the first time they're going through loss. You know, as adults, unfortunately, we get used to dealing with loss. It's something that but I'm in my 50s, I've dealt with loss several times in a variety of different avenues of life. But for kids, each one of those kind of categories is the first time they're checking that box. So I assume that's a big part of helping a kid through it. Is there's no background knowledge, there's nothing they've gone through that kind of helps prepare them for it.
Exactly. It can be any of those experiences is the first for them. And so it can be confusing. I think as adults, we tend to want to shield our children from that pain and loss, but in a lot of ways that can have a reverse effect. Studies show that for the most part, we want to be as open and honest with our children as we can be and direct. You don't need to give them more information than they need. That would be confusing. But you want to be pretty clear and concise about what you say and let them take the lead. If they ask questions, try to answer it at a developmentally appropriate level and be sure that, you're being honest and avoid a lot of those euphemisms that we use, like they passed on, they're gone, because that can be very confusing, especially for a younger child.
So just be honest and direct. And I assume another thing that happens with kids, because it happens with adults, is there's just a myriad of ways for them to process grief, to internalize it, to how it impacts their behavior. How, when you're working with kids, do you help them to figure out what's even going on and then to take the step of dealing with it in a healthy way?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, it can be a variety of different things, and often the child themselves doesn't even realize where it's coming from.
Yeah.
So with your younger children, like toddler preschool age, you may see some changes in behavior like toileting, regression in sleep, irritability, maybe some increased rambunctious play actually. So their play may change and they can have some more separation anxiety. With older children, they can be very irritable, and across the board, I think grief can show that effect. But the irritability, anger at the loved ones that are left, once again, kind of some of that regression of more infantile speech and talking, and changes in any kind of change in behavior across all ages is a big sign. And then when we get to our teens, we really are looking for some withdrawing and some signs of depression. But it also can be withdrawing from activities or people that they once found enjoyment, but also that irritability again. And with
Yeah.
our teens, I think a lot of times we have trouble approaching them. And what we want to do is make sure that we're offering them that listening ear and let them know that we're available to them, but then not pressuring them in any way to talk. So just asking if they want to share. If they're not in the mood to share, just be ready when they are willing to open up. You might be surprised when it is.
Yeah. So a change of behavior is kind of a red flag, but especially if you know there's been some loss, if you know there might be a reason for grief, and then you see the change in behavior as a parent, as an adult in their lives, it's probably time for us to step in, right?
Yeah, so you definitely can do some things at home to be supportive, but then if it is prolonged and goes on, especially more than 6 months. Now, grief can, maybe initially the child doesn't react at all, and that can be alarming, but that is normal. It can be up to a year before they react and start showing those symptoms, but if those symptoms are prolonged, especially 6 months or more, they may be having prolonged grief disorder. They may be suffering from anxiety or depression, as well as an adjustment disorder. So seeking out your pediatrician or somewhere like Crosswinds where we can help evaluate really where we can help, whether it's with cognitive behavioral therapy or play therapy. There's ways to help walk with a child in their grief, and often it's not a sign that as a parent or caregiver that you aren't attending to your child's needs, but you may be grieving quite a bit yourself and not able to fully be present to them. And then that way they have a sounding board to talk to, and don't feel like, sometimes children feel like they are putting more burden on you if they share too much, if it's a very close relationship that has been lost.
Yeah. You mentioned something very briefly there that I want to touch on, and we could probably do a whole podcast on it. Play therapy. My understanding as a non-counselor is that it's playing with a kid in a purposeful way to help them be free and help them feel comfortable to share their feelings, and stuff comes out as they play that might not come out if you weren't playing with them in an intentional way to help them, right?
Correct. So like we said, children definitely have their own level of thinking and their own language, and play is kind of their language.
Yeah.
So that's where they find comfort, where their world is really processed. So often small children will be playing with their toys and talking about death and their toys dying, and that is normal. So letting them explore and using play to guide where their feelings are, because when we say, "How are you feeling?" A child might not be ready to say, "I'm sad. I'm missing my mom or dad."
Yeah. I suppose if they're very young, they might not even know exactly how to say that. They might not know the emotion, the thought that they're having, and how to put that into words, but it could come out through play therapy.
Exactly. So it just kind of facilitates them learning, and it can really facilitate some lifelong skills as far as emotions and being able to express those emotions as well if guided in therapy.
Yeah. I think the last thing I want to ask, Molly, is something, again, you kind of briefly touched on. It's probably fair to assume that most times when we have kids going through grief, the parents are going through the grief too. It's something that probably impacted the whole family, whether it be the loss of a grandmother or a grandfather or a pet or a friend or whatever. It's probably impacting the whole family. How do we as adults make sure that we're not so consumed by our own grief that we're being attentive and being aware of the signs that our kids might be going through grief too? What tips would you say to someone to make sure they're not so caught up in their own grief that they're aware of what's happening with their kids?
Well, and I think first and foremost, you started to hit on that, is that being aware of your own grief and attending to it, and acknowledging and getting your own support. Studies have shown that how the adult in a child's life grieves is a big indicator of how they process and are able to manage it. So them being able to see that sometimes you get overwhelmed, and sharing that, communicating that, and saying, "I'm sad right now," and telling them why, is a very big support for them, that they can see that it's okay to be sad, but then also doing things with the child that they enjoy so that they know it's okay to feel happy too, that while those negative or those sad feelings may be present, it's okay to also feel happiness. And that can be difficult, but also if you need help, and make sure that you take it. So modeling for children is very important throughout their growth and development. So modeling that sometimes you need a little extra support, whether it's letting someone run to the grocery store for you someday, or taking a break for yourself and saying, I'm going to go take a walk. That shows them that it's okay to get a little overwhelmed, and how they can have a healthy coping mechanism for that.
Good tips. Childhood grief is a big topic. It's something that impacts all kids at some point. It impacts them in a different way, and depending on their age, they're going to react to it in a different way. And so just be aware, keep an eye out for it. And when you need to see someone, Crosswinds Counseling is a great avenue for you. Molly, thank you so much. Molly Soberalski is one of the tremendous counselors we have here at Crosswinds, and you can find her and all of them at crosswindscounseling.org. And we'll see you next time here on the podcast, Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling. Thanks for watching Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get more of our podcast. And you can comment in the section below. Perhaps you could share what you'd like us to discuss in future episodes. We've got new episodes coming out every week. So we'll see you next time on Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling.